All right, well, I think we'll kick it off and start. So welcome everyone. My name is Christine Fox. I am with CAST, and we're excited to be able to share with you today some tips for IT leaders on assistive technology implementation. So there is a bit.ly that has all of the resources that we're going to share today, including the slides available on the screen. And then my colleague Sam is here, and she will be posting some links in the chat as we move forward. So that way you don't have to take pictures with your phone of the screen or try to scribble things down. So for those of you not familiar with CAST, CAST is a nonprofit. It's our 40th anniversary in 2024, so we're talking 40 forward. CAST's mission is to lead, inspire, and convene a global community to design equitable, inclusive learning experience through our Universal Design for Learning framework. So if you are familiar with the Universal Design for Learning, if you've heard of UDL, CAST is synonymous with that because we were the original authors of the UDL framework. We have published the UDL guidelines, and we are about to publish this summer the UDL guidelines 3.0. So the UDL guidelines had not been looked at since COVID. So there, of course, are variables related to that, as well as considerations around inclusion as we look at the guidelines. So if you know UDL, you actually do know CAST. So today we are going to have a panel. I myself am the Vice President of Operations here at CAST. Some of you I do know because of my role at CoSN in 2021, but my background is in education. I was a classroom teacher, a reading coach, and I spent the bulk of my career in ed tech at CETA. And then we also have with us Zach Chase he's a Digital Equity Impact Fellow at the Office of Ed Tech at the U.S. Department of Ed. And then joining us a little bit later, she's multitasking this afternoon, is Anita Vermeer. She's an educational specialist with the Office of Special Education at USDOE. And I'll let them share a little bit more about themselves as they speak. So we'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Joe, for sharing where you're from, but we'd also like to hear your role. What is your role in your district? There's some options, but some of you might be the CTO or IT lead, and you might have a different option. So we'd love for you to take a moment and post in the chat what your role is. Okay, so we have IT, we have AT, great, Director of Technology. And you can click to share with everyone when you post, and then all your colleagues here will be able to see. So awesome. And we know Sam is here from the CAST team. So our goals today are really to talk about assistive technology and inclusive technology as related to the National Ed Tech Plan, as well as the assistive technology guidance, the federal policy. And then my goal is to share about CITES. CITES is a federally funded project. I am the project director for that as one of my roles at CAST, and we want to share the resources that are available to you to work with your colleagues. So when we talk about accessibility and when something is accessible, this is the federal guidance around that. In this graphic, and everything we share today is openly licensed. So not only do we want you to share this content, we encourage you to remix and reuse it as it best meets your needs. Accessibility is shaped by what we need to do, our interactions with the environment, and our personal preferences. So when we think about accessibility, I think a lot about content, accessible content in the classroom, as well as the accessibility of devices that students are using and the tools on those devices. And we want to make sure that a person with a disability can acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, enjoy the same services in an equally effective manner, equally integrated manner, with substantially equivalent ease of use as a person without a disability. And I would add to that, at the same time. We probably are all too familiar with times where a new student might join your district in the middle of the year. It might be in August when school starts, and may or may not have access to the content or devices that they need at the same time as their fellow students. So IDEA does provide official definitions of assistive technology devices and assistive technology services. I'm not going to read those to you. CITES also has a full glossary of considerations around inclusive technology practices. So I'm going to ask Sam if she plopped that in the chat that you can reference later in your work. So we are going to show a short video today. I show this full video. It's 5 minutes, but I think it's worth your 5 minutes. It talks about inclusive technologies, the what and the why. And that might be, you know, for the folks like Hannah that are AT leads. This is, you know, old news. But I want to also share the full video because I want you to be able to have seen it and then maybe leverage it in your work. And I'll also share a link, or Sam will for me, a link to a facilitator guide. So we actually have a professional learning session built around this video that you can leverage. It has the slides, it has the outline, it has activities, it even has the sample email you could send out to your teams. So hopefully you'll find it useful. I'm just going to go to YouTube. I'm going to go and play.
Video title appears, The What and Why of Inclusive Technology.
We've grown accustomed to having technology all around us, at home and in our schools. But how can we best use this technology to remove barriers to our students' learning experiences? What does that even look like? For some students, it might mean using dictation or speak to type to get their ideas out. For others, it might be selecting the text-to-speech feature or speak feature when reading a digital textbook. And for others, it might mean using the word prediction or predictive text feature on a mobile device when responding to a class prompt. All of these features are examples of what we call inclusive technologies. Inclusive technologies are those tools and strategies that reduce or remove barriers to the learning experience. Now, a lot of times when people hear the term inclusive technology, they think, isn't that just a special education thing? But actually, inclusive technology is not just a special education thing or just a general education thing. In fact, it's an all education thing. So let's check out some different kinds of inclusive technologies and see how they can empower and support a broad range of learners. We like to think of inclusive technology in 3 categories. First, we have accessible educational materials, also known as AIM. Accessible educational materials are print and digital materials that are designed to make them usable by all. Some examples of these would include a large print or Braille version, or the digital or audio version with captions on any accompanying videos. Accessible educational materials also can include all of the materials that teachers create. For example, a teacher might add alt text to describe the images used in a lesson to make those images accessible for students using a screen reader. Or they might look out for color contrast on their slides to ensure those with low vision have access. Or they might rewrite a lesson introduction using plain text to support students with cognitive differences. When we're talking about accessible materials, we're really talking about the way materials were developed. When materials are accessible, anyone can use them in the way that is needed. The next category of inclusive technology is called accessible technologies. Accessible technologies are features that provide learners with access to the content in digital materials. They are often built-in features that can be enabled. Some examples of accessible technologies include built-in text-to-speech features in digital textbooks, options within software or mobile devices to adjust font or color contrast, and text highlighting tools. Finally, we have assistive technologies, commonly known as AT. Assistive technologies fall on a continuum from no tech to low tech, mid tech, all the way to high tech. Along this continuum, assistive technologies are designed to address specific barriers that learners with disabilities may face when they interact with their learning. No to low tech assistive technologies are items that include little to no electronics and require no maintenance. These are things like sticky notes as part of the work system, a pencil or stylus grip, timers, or communication boards or books. Mid-tech devices include electronics and therefore require more maintenance. They also require training for staff to use them. These can be single message switches and communication overlays for speech generating devices or alternative keyboard options. High-tech options are those items that are complex electronics and require training and maintenance. These might be text-to-speech or screen reading software on a laptop, refreshable braille displays and keyboards, and even dedicated speech generating devices. So to summarize, accessible educational materials are materials that have been designed with accessibility in mind. Accessible technologies are features on devices like phones and laptops that can be enabled. And assistive technologies are specialized devices or software that are designed to address specific barriers. Now, some accessible technology features may also be assistive technology features. Like a speech-to-text feature on a phone can make text more usable for anyone, which makes it accessible technology. But it can also help someone with low vision, which makes it assistive technology. But one important difference is that a feature becomes assistive technology when it's deemed a need in an IEP. No matter where the learning is occurring, brick and mortar, virtual programs, or even learning from home on a snow day, the adoption of inclusive technology strategies and tools as part of the learning experience creates empowerment and belonging for many learners. But for some, access to these tools is a civil right. For students served by individualized education plans, IEP teams are required to consider a learner's need for assistive technologies to access their learning. A plan is put in place to provide the tools, strategies, and appropriate training for students, staff, and even families. This plan is a legally binding agreement between the district and the learner and their family. So ensuring the supports are being provided is not optional. And that includes virtual programs, regardless if the student is full-time or part-time. Okay, we've gotten started looking at what inclusive technologies.
Just trying to get out of full screen. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening to that. I share that quite a bit in different sessions, and I never get tired of hearing at it because it just like makes everything sink for me a little bit. And we know that many of you might be experts in this space, but we also hope that you learn something new, or at least at minimum, it's a tool that you might be able to share within your districts. And one big part of the AT guidance that Anita will be coming on and talking about a little bit is myths and facts. And people do forget that low-tech items like pencil grips and sticky notes are considered accessible technologies as well. Often we go right to the tech side of that and the electronics. So I'm going to quickly go through the goal of CITES. Some of you might be familiar, some of you might not. I do have a session at the CoSN conference where we can dig in a little bit deeper. But this is a center funded by the Office of Special Education Programs at the U.S. Department of Ed. And our goal is really to bring together inclusive tech systems where AT and special ed teams are talking to ed tech and IT teams. And some of your fellow CoSN members are highlighted as part of the CITES, as we call it, the Center Inclusive Technology Education Systems. It was based on the 2016 National Ed Tech Plan, but in looking at the way the Ed Tech Plan was released recently, which is the good segue, that plan continues to include and actually enhances the work of CITES. We are structured. We have a variety of resources to help you get started. I'll ask Sam to put my email in the chat. If your district is interested in digging in, we can share more on how to make that happen. But we provide resources at the district level to look at the different areas of CITES. This was built with a variety of districts from across the country. So we did not just plop this out of the air and look at the Ed Tech Plan, but really worked closely with a variety of districts to support the creation implementation in the first 5 years. We're in our second 5 years of the grant. So now we have really time to dig in and disseminate. And this is just a quick highlight. I don't want to take up too much of Zach's time. So, but we have self-assessments we have a variety of examples of districts across the country of how they're implementing inclusive practices in AT. And then we have a full video series that I mentioned at the top. So with that, I think we'll start talking about the guidance. So two federal guidance documents were released on February 22nd. It was a big day at CAST. It was a big day for many across the country that had been involved or knew what was happening. But AT guidance was released about myths and facts on assistive technologies from the Office of Special Ed. And then simultaneously, the National Ed Tech Plan was released by the Office of Ed Tech. That was purposeful, but I'm not going to talk about the why of that. I'm going to have a friend, someone that I've worked with quite a bit over time, Zach Chase, part of a previous version of the National Ed Tech Plan, and through other work, talk a little bit about the different audiences and the why of this new plan. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can have more of a dialogue and conversation. So welcome, Zach. Happy Leap Day.
Hi, Christine. Thanks so much. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to join CAST and CoSN and talk about these resources.
Yeah, awesome. So can you talk a little bit about how and why the Office of Ed Tech and the Office of Special Ed, work together on these documents and how that came about?
We worked, if we're going to call something a national educational technology plan, then we really wanted to work to make sure that we were representing and taking into consideration the needs of really everyone in the nation. So at a very high level, there's an example in the EdTech plan from each of the states across the country, as well as Guam and Puerto Rico, the District of Columbia, juvenile justice. And so that same approach to representation and inclusion was one we took in thinking through the guidance. And so recognizing that in public schools across the country, there are conversations that are and need to be happening between general education and special education offices and programs. And we wanted to make sure that we were doing the same thing within the department to make sure that if somebody was reading guidance from one office, that they didn't look at the guidance from another and think, oh my goodness, these two things are completely dissimilar or misaligned. So it was important that we do the same kind of collaboration that we hope is happening within our schools and districts across the country.
I think it's incredible, as I mentioned, having been a part of this process in the past, but the fact that the federal government and both offices are modeling what we're asking states and then as well as districts and even within schools to do is so powerful, because now it can't be, no one can shake a finger, right? Everyone can say, oh, this is how things should happen. And you've heard me say this before, but I have to congratulate again on having all of those examples. For 8 years, I worked on the Title IID national report, and it was hard to make sure that we got engagement from every single state, never mind all the territories. So that is really powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a labor of love, to be sure.
Yes. And those are kind of, to me, that's what people stick with, right? That's what sticks to folks, right? Is those examples of things in action where they can identify with, or even have people to reach out to their colleagues to say, oh, that's how did you really do that? Like I saw the, 5 sentences, but I need to know more. Can you talk a little bit about how this NETP is maybe different from previous iterations?
Sure. So I got to be involved in 2016 for the 2016 plan. I got to lead the development there as well. And this one's even a much different document than that one was. Part of it is out of necessity, and part of it is out of response to the field as we were going through. So in the development of this plan, we have over 1,000 voices represented. We did some online focus groups, some one-on-one interviews. Some polls were put into the field, and we did a number of workshops as we were drafting these ideas and putting them together. And what we kept hearing was we need practical recommendations and we need examples that we can follow. And so this plan, I already mentioned the examples, draws on that. From just a structural place, we put all the recommendations from each section into the beginning of each of those sections, whereas in previous plans, those have kind of been the last piece, and we hope that people have hung on, but we want to make sure that when people see it, they think, oh, this is what they want me to do, and then read through the content for kind of that justification piece. So I think that those are some big changes, and it's also a plan that says we can build things, and people are building things, solutions and systems that are more equitable, that are more just, and that are more inclusive for all of the humans in these education systems. I think it is a plan that is firmly rooted in a goal of educational equity for all children and students in our system. But it's also a plan that says we need to think about the humans, the adult humans who are in our systems, the educators who are in our systems, and ask, are we giving them the support and the time and the space that they need to build their capacity to meet students' needs? And we know that that's just not often the case, quite frankly, and that folks felt that more tightly during the pandemic when we went into emergency remote learning, right? All of a sudden, educators were asked to use a lot more technological tools to do things than they were perhaps prepared for, and they didn't have the time to really learn, right? So we want to pause and recognize that we need to take that time now to say, these tools are here. A major investment has been made into those tools. Let's also put an equal investment of time and capacity building into making sure we can get the most out of them and help all students access their education.
Definitely. I feel that the document is kind of forgiving, right? It's saying, think about where you are and where you want to be, versus sometimes when you think of federal guidelines or guidance, it's much more of a top-down approach. But to me, the way that it's organized and the language is, this needs to happen and we need you to be a part of that, but let's look at where you are or where your particular needs are. And I'm hoping that that's folks appreciate that. I'm guessing that was purposeful.
It was by design. Context matters.
Yeah.
We have, nearly 14,000 school districts across the country of sizes from, the size of New York City public schools to small rural school districts from near where I grew up in Illinois. And we know that all of those places are going to have their own contexts for what they're trying to do and how they build those solutions, but also their capacities for executing on some of those is going to be wildly different, right? So there's a human infrastructure component that we need to be attending to as well. And really a belief that everybody's doing the best they can. And so how do we meet them where they are? In the same way that we would hope that all educators are meeting students where they are, right? Like there's definitely a sense of somebody, when we released this document, Dr. Beth Holland, who was on our technical working group, said that this is a very human document, that this is about people more than it is about technology. And honestly, that's a place where ed tech has kind of fallen down in the last few decades, right? Is that we haven't remembered the people and the capacity and potential of what people can add to all of these processes.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I would say, having participated in 2 iterations of the information gathering, it seemed that there was more of that, to your point, of the different interviews and focus groups and meetings. And also it was more open dialogue during those, with great questions being asked, as well as, and I hate to say it this way, but sometimes maybe we felt like checking a box where this was really, the content was implemented and the listening part was open ears. Yeah. So for CoSN members that perhaps have read this guidance, the NETP already, that might be, they might have glanced at it, they might have read the whole thing, but now they have to think about their teams across their district. So, what would you say when they're looking at it again, or maybe for the first time, because we don't know everyone that's on, what would you ask them to kind of dig into specifically when today's theme is inclusive technology?
As Lindsay Jones has mentioned in her initial statement about the NETP, we have more than 60 references to universal design for learning within the document. And it's only a 113-page document. So, you're going to run into UDL.
Only.
Yes. I mean, it could have been a novel.
Yeah.
So I would say, when I say UDL and you say UDL, we have a shared understanding of what that means. But I think that within school districts, there can oftentimes be space for a CAO, a CTO, a CIO to not necessarily be familiar with the UDL framework. Or I think that video that you shared was incredibly powerful, that when we say things like accessibility, when we say things like assistive technology, I think that those are words that have intuitive meanings, but that there are also really specific meanings. And so I think just starting a dialogue to say, do we all know what this means? And that is for the greater good of our system, but it's also, there's a legal underpinning there that says that we legally need to understand what we need to do to meet the needs of students. So I think that that's a start. Are we working from a same understanding? I think the glossary from CAST that you shared, or that Sam shared, is a powerful tool to help start that. I would also say start at the end of the NATP. So recognizing not everybody's going to want to read a 100-page document, or at least to start from there. There are 4 key appendices at the very end for educators, school leaders, district leaders, and state leaders to say, if all you read are 2 pages, read these 2 pages. And for members of CoSN, I would say you're probably all in on ed tech. Or at least more in than many folks in your system. And so those 2 pages are meant for you. Like, if you can get a little bit of time in a cabinet meeting to say, I'd love to run a conversation. And you know that if you were to say to your assistant superintendent, go read this whole policy, they're probably not going to do it. But to say, I'd love to talk about these 2 pages and how we measure up to what the rest of the country is doing, we hope that that can spark the conversation that leads you into the larger document of kind of, they mentioned UDL here, and I don't know if we're doing that or not. Well, let's look back and see. They mentioned a baseline of accessibility as a component of access. Well, let's look back, those kinds of things. So that's what I'm hoping members of CoSN can start with.
Yeah, I love that. So as someone that worked on large documents, with my time at CETA, we did start creating those appendices based on leaders in the field's input. Hey, I'm not going to be able to get the cabinet's attention with this 100 or 40-page document, but if you give me a 2-pager and appendices, I can get their interest and then dig in deeper. So I saw that Anita jumped on, and I know she has, oh, great, thank you. Anita Vermeer is here with the Office of Special Education Programs. She is a lead and an expert in assistive technologies, and she's here to share a little bit more about the AT guidance. So we will have Zach back as well, but we wanted to give her a bit of time to really highlight the AT guidance, thinking of our CoSN members with us today and those watching the recording. You know, when you think about the collaboration, Zach talked a little bit about the collaboration across for the National Ed Tech Plan. But I believe the OSEP, Office of Special Education Programs, was purposeful in reaching out to OET around AT guidance as well with the myths and facts. So can you share a little bit more about how and why that happened?
Well, like Zach shared about the NATP, right? It's the vision and baseline to understanding how important digital equity is, so that assistive and accessible technologies has to be in the center of instructional design. And so it's kind of the same thing with the AT guidance, right? Like it's not just a OSEP job, it's not just a gen ed job, it's not a tech job, it's more than that. We have to build bridges with one another. So, you know, we modeled that by having the NATP and the AT guidance coming out together, because we hope that that's a message I would hope that CoSN members get, right? Is that whether you're collaborating with someone from the procurement office or a gen ed teacher or a parent or something, like everybody has different perspectives and different strengths to bring to the table. And one important thing too is bringing people with disabilities to those conversations too, right? No matter whether it's a parent supporting a child with disability or whether it's somebody with a disability themselves. I think that's important. And so our AT guidance provides a lot of examples and descriptions on ways that you can include these roles. And you want to be inclusive. So you want to have infrastructures in place that you can access so that people with disabilities can access these technologies. So the one thing I know that you learned today about what CITES is, and I think that that's a really great place to start too, because they really have a lot of inclusive tech practices, examples and things like that too. And they really try to emphasize that when you bring people together and discuss those kinds of infrastructures, the same way that the NATP with Zach and Office of Ed Tech and AT and OSEP brought together, right? When you bring us all together in the same room, then you can work out ways to overcome barriers. You can think about more efficient and practical systems. So, because it's not just about following the law, we really want to model what's and implement what's best practices, because we want all students to be successful.
Definitely. And, you know, I was on the CoSN recently released their Driving K-12 Innovation document a few weeks ago, and I was on that, and I was able to talk for a few minutes about learner variability. And the members that were participating in that were really active in highlighting and saying, yes, this is important. So I think some of it is them then connecting with the right people within their, so that they're all on the same page. I know with sites and interviewing different districts and asking about how folks collaborate, we had anything from Hampton Township, which is a CoSN member, where their special ed director and their CTO work together on procurement and RFPs and so many things, all the way to when I asked CTO, oh, well, how do you collaborate with special ed? They said, oh, well, sometimes I see that director on the way to the bathroom because we're on the same floor. And I'll just say, did you get that device for that kid? And they wanted to be highlighted because they did talk to each other, but that, that's not the modeling that we're hoping to see. So talking about AT and myths and facts, what are, we showed the video highlighting what we are talking about, but what would you say are some of the most common misconceptions around assistive technologies?
Well, it's really interesting putting together this document with all of the different myths because there's so many in there, but I'll just really maybe strike two that have really resonated with me, I think, that are two big ideas of these misconceptions. And one of them is, like you showed in the video, is the different tech terms we use, the assistive technology and accessible technology. The NETP and the AT guidance define these because AT, assistive technology, is not a one size fits all. And, so like the video captions is accessibility and it can support, many learners, but assistive technology could be the actual barrier reduction they need, because AT is connected when the individual need helps manage the aspects of their disability. So like I just had a conversation with somebody the other day where like a child was not able to hold a pencil. So if they're not able to hold a pencil, right, then what is it that they need to help them get their communication and to show their learning, right? They might need other options. So that's just one kind of example. But I do want to share that also in one of my former roles, I was a tech specialist. And so this is how I think that these myth documents, this can be really helpful because it's all about the services. So I worked in a private school. We put a lot of money into technology. We rolled out this one-to-one laptop program. And I know it's a huge undertaking. So I can totally relate to all the IT people, been there, done that with the hours and hours of planning and rolling it out. And they put a basic image on all the laptops to make sure that everybody had the same. But what I also remember, though, is that once school started, we said, okay, we're going to make ourselves available because we're going to have to help modify these individual laptops, right? Like there's going to be different features that are going to be needed. They're going to need supports. So we had planned for it. But what we didn't plan was how many people needed help all at once and how to prioritize those requests. So sometimes I think that misconception in there is about, again, it comes back to that infrastructure and making sure that you have the right people in place to forward think about it. Because it brings me to my second point, like you have to make decisions and provide services with a team. I know we keep talking about that because that's the misconception, right? Is it's not just a special ed, it's not just the tech's job. It can include principals, it can include parents, it can include general educators, because it's everybody's responsibility to have that knowledge and skills to help students with disabilities. Because assistive technology is not the devices, and it's also about the services. It's not just about being available, but it's knowing about how to provide the right services. So that would be like a lesson I wish I had known in that role. And so the AT guidance can give you some ways to make it happen, whether you're a principal, a teacher, or a tech specialist.
First, I have to comment that I think it's great that both you and Zach have walked the walk, right? You've been on this IT side and supporting the implementation of AT. So you can give those examples of when I actually had to do this. I'm sure what you just shared is not unique to, and some of the CoSN members have lived the rollouts and the upgrades and the fire hose situations as well. So you said there are quite a few myths and facts. I think it's 28 in the document itself. Here at CITES, CAS, we are working on I'll show an example, but we're working on myth facts cards and images that any educators will be able to use. But when you think about them, what is a way that you feel that folks can overcome, one of the myths and really try to ensure that the facts are what's being shared across their district?
I think Zach alluded to some of this before in my previous comments too, is about that building connections with different specialties. You know, in that example I was giving, it was the tech team planning, right? All of the service, all of the rollout, all of the support. But if you had, well, I mean, obviously we got procurement, but you know, if we had got looped in with them earlier, we may have been able to have been proactive in making sure that we had the right tools needed for those students, rather than, you know, after them coming to us and having to edit and change what their laptop had. So I think it's really important, like to overcome a myth, like is really consider ways to build from the ground up, so you don't have to backtrack. And then that means also like being advocating for what students need. Don't be afraid to ask, also giving some grace, you know, and build bridges with each other and learn from the other disciplines. So I know CITES has a wonderful community of practice that I, you know, encourage people to join, because I think like librarians go on there, right? Teachers go on there, and even technicians go on there, and AT specialists. Like I think that's a great opportunity to just learn from one another. I think that's the best way to overcome it, is just being okay to learn from other people.
Yeah, as we were wrapping up CITES 1.0, as we refer to it, last summer, I felt a huge victory was one of the district's CTOs had gone to ISTE, had never been there, went to most of the inclusion and assistive technology sessions at ISTE instead of going to sort of the classic what a CTO or ed tech leader would go to. And as a debrief, he said, you know what I'm going to do? When we do our orders this summer, I'm going to have a couple of extra touchscreen laptops and a few with larger capacity of RAM for some of the systems and tools that are and larger screens. He's like, I'm just going to have a few in my bank because then I don't have to scramble. And I was like, okay, yes, this is the kind of simple things. I know budgets are not unlimited, but he just wanted to have a couple of each available. So when school started, especially when kids register, you know, the week before, and you don't know who's going to be there, that they were on top of it. So yeah. I'd love to get you and Zach on to ask you a question together. And then I know you're you might have to hop off, which is totally fine. So, how or when do you think we'll know that some of these efforts have paid off? Like, we know systems change doesn't happen overnight. And I'm not asking you to give like a specific month or year, but when you think about success, and this content hasn't even been out, you know, like I guess 6 weeks or something like that. How and when do you feel like you'll know that the success has been, and this has been driving change?
You want to take that first, Zach?
Oh man. Yeah. I think a couple of different ways, right? So at a very practical level, the middle divide within the NETP is what we frame as the digital design divide. And that is about building the capacity of all educators to use the UDL framework to design learning experiences using, at times, multiple ed tech tools to meet the needs of all learners. But when we look at kind of how we talk about professional learning, we tend to segregate those pieces, right? So content learning, knowledge learning is in one bucket. Technology learning is in another bucket. Effective practices is in another bucket. I think if we start to see states develop matrices and districts develop matrices to say, how are you using your Title II money? Are you triple dipping here? So are you creating professional learning experiences that are about technology, UDL, content knowledge, and effective practices, rather than saying we have to learn about those things separately? Then we're going to see some really powerful work moving forward. I think it's also about how we buy things. One of my favorite examples comes from the Francis Howell School District in Missouri, right? So that movement of an AT director into the procurement process is key. But what would happen if we set a baseline expectation for neurovariability, for accessibility, for for UDL, for interoperability, for privacy, right? We know that there are those kinds of validations. I think CAST has recently developed one of those validations for products. If we start to see those being built into RFP processes so that districts don't have to spend so much time and thereby capital verifying some of these elements of design, but really get to say, how does this rubber meet the road? I think that that's going to be powerful. I know LAUSD just built one of those into their RFP process, right? That can be a really powerful move and tool to reduce the load on our humans, to say, we've got to kick all these tires to get stuff moving. So I think those are some pieces. If we start to see saying, like, here's our baseline, if you can't even get this validation, then we don't really have time to talk to you yet. But then at the same time, we have these Title II, Title IV dollars, and here is this constellation of skills we want all of our educators to be building at the same time. And that will fast track some of our acceptance of proposed behaviors. I think that could be a really powerful measure of success as well.
Well, that's great. I shamelessly put in links to Francis Howell, and then Jenks Public Schools also did a big shift in their procurement over the last couple of years. So, Anita.
I wanted to add, because I think that seeing success may be in different levels of layers, right? Like you'll see the system level, and you'll see maybe these procurement changes and things like that. And in the end, though, like when you really know your efforts, it's students, right? And children, you'll see the outcomes that, like not just their learning outcomes, but I think the mind shift outcomes, and then of the educators. Like I have this conversation with this other project that I work with, and they're working with schools and doing training. And 4 years ago, the kids and the principals, I should say, would say, those are those kids, those are the special ed kids. And now 4 years later, they've changed systems and culture, right, of the school. These are our students. Like, no, they're not that teacher's class, that student. So I think it goes, it starts up here, and no matter what, and I think that's the intention with our AT guidance, right? I shouldn't say I think, I know I was part of the writing team. It was the intention of the guidance. But different.
I was gonna say, I bet you know for sure.
Different people can take it and or make it, see an effort at a different level, right? Like, so people at like CoSN members will see these procurement changes, we'll see these system changes, but truly the efforts will be to loop back and capture a story. So if if getting all the student data, all this big, capture a story, talk to your neighbor, talk to a parent with disabilities, or, those are ways that we really, I think, hit home, because you have to hit hearts to also make a change.
Can I build on something? I know we're
Definitely.
I don't know where we are as far as time goes, but I'm going to keep talking anyway, because I think Anita, I think there's another measure of success there, and I think that level of scale is important. So this was truly a collaborative document, and one of the pieces in the NETP talks about really being thoughtful when you are providing district devices to students about the level of lockdown you put on, right? So there is a tendency in some spaces, a well-meaning tendency, I should say, to kind of lock down all of these options and these features. And we know from the video that once it's written in the IEP, it is a legal right to some of these things. But we also know that sometimes it is difficult for a caretaker or a family member to know to navigate toward that IEP meeting, right? Or to say, oh, there's an assumption that everybody knows what all the technology is that's available out there. So I think a scale change of success is asking, do we really need to lock down these features? Because if we don't need to, then we are not creating more disability, right? We are not creating a disabling environment for our learners. And I think that a big change there would be these systems stopping and thinking, do I need to turn off text to speech? Do I need to turn off speech to text? Just the most basic levels. I think, Christine, you said, I don't know what I would do without that feature, right? Those started as accessibility features that oftentimes had to have a long process, sometimes a long process, to get activated for students. But if we just leave those on and say there's a different way that we all operate in our lives to get our work done, to acquire knowledge as adults, and we want to make sure that those pathways are open for our students and our learners, then we can stop creating disabling environments for our students as well.
Yeah, agreed. So I'm glad you piped in, because we're all dependent on these accessibility features. It might not be AT for us, but we're dependent. But that's how we all live in our social and daily lives and in the workforce. So so important to have that access. And I feel like there is better communication. I've heard examples too where something was blocked, and then once, because there's a relationship, right, between the folks on both sides, they can say, oh, I didn't realize that was so important. Or when you have to change a student's password, you know, the IT CTO is talking to the special education and AT department, say, okay, how is this going to impact certain kids? Because for some people, for all of it, it's annoying to change your password, right? But for certain people and students, it's much more comprehensive, and other people need to be informed. So yeah. Well, this has been incredible. I know that there's folks with us today that will be online. We'll have a podcast version of this as well. I'm just going to share my screen quickly, and I want folks to feel comfortable to pop any questions in the chat. But I wanted to highlight a couple of other resources available. I mentioned the myths, facts, tools that we're working on. So we're going to have a series of these 28 cards with really cool graphics. So it's taking us a little bit longer than we wanted to make sure we have the right images. But for each of the 28 myths and facts, we will have a deck, and we will have images in a variety of sizes so that any educator, and hopefully also OET and OSEP, are able to leverage them in their work. And you might focus on particular area one at a time. So I wanted to highlight that. I know that Sam put in the chat the examples and the CITES policy page, so that's where we'll keep adding. We did have leaders from both OET and the assistant secretary from Office of Special Education. And so there's an archive of that digs into this a little bit deeper in a slightly different aspect. And then so feel free to add any questions or comments, but I also want to give everyone some breathing room between your next call. Anita graciously reminded us of our community of practice. So we meet bi-monthly. It's truly a dialogue. We'll give a topic and folks come to those conversations to ask each other questions. We have a Slack channel. So if something comes up and you want to ask other leaders interested in inclusive tech practices, what they're doing or how they're doing it, you can feel free to join us or share that opportunity with your colleagues. And we'd love for you to stay connected. So I have my email here, which was also shared in the chat. Oh, I see my images are a little off there, which probably minimizes accessibility. Having said that, Zach mentioned the critical need for UDL. We are having an event this summer in Sacramento, UDL Con. So it's a play on Comic-Con. I know that the NETP will be discussed there in a this light, but digging in a bit deeper. So we'd love to have you join us at that. And I also always have to share the disclaimer that what we've shared is not. Well, we did have representatives from the U.S. Department of Education on here, but what I said is not necessarily representative of what the federal government might say. Looking, I see Sam has shared a bunch of resources in the chat. I want to thank Zach and Anita for their time and energy. We know they're busy and they've been sharing a lot about this in different ways, but we wanted to be sure to share with the CoSN membership, you know, kind of a unique aspect with your membership in mind. So with that, I'll close it out, but I'll also stay on to see if others have questions or comments. Oh, well, it looks like we're closing out. Thanks again, Zach. Have an awesome afternoon and happy mini Friday.